G'day and welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to do a video, an update on second focal plane versus first focal plane, and also a little bit about high power scopes and where the world's going to make sense of things a little bit for people. I suppose to start off with, what I've got in front of us is just a range of scopes of what I sort of use, and obviously use lots of different scopes over the years, but largely these are the ones I've used, and I'll quickly go through that. Our stuff started from what still is a very good cost-effective option with good glass, good value for money, is in a Cytron scope. This is a little Cytron scope that we use on Sam's 223. Hasn't been out recently, but did a great job, and we had a few of them back in the day. This is the last Cytron we've got now. Still very good, but largely I found many years ago, almost 10 years ago, that I went for this scope here actually, which is a Night Force Attacker, in a 5x25 in a second focal plane, MOA, MOAR reticle, all the bits and pieces I wanted it to be, and really liked them. I chose that way back then because it was ELR and they had 120 minutes of internal elevation, and that's what I wanted. I liked the glass, liked everything about them, so that's what I've commonly used, and that's probably still my favourite scope. And we go up to, this is another very good scope. This is the Recon Gen 2, lots of internal elevation, 40mm tube, first focal plane, very fine reticle, works really well for extreme long range shooting, and a little bit where the conversation is going in that one there. And then probably up there in the, I suppose, what I've got here, this is the 7x35. This is also a first focal plane. I also have one of these in a second focal plane, and I'll go through and explain that as well. This one's actually sitting here because this is the one I was out shooting with yesterday, and I wanted to explain a little bit for people. I'm testing this new wedge system, which is the Night Force piece on the front here. That actually comes off. I'll undo it so you can actually see what it is we're talking about. This is actually an elevation adder, and what I mean by that is that this unit, when you put it onto the front, or it's supposed to mount in front of the scope, adds 100 minutes of internal elevation to the scope. I'll put that back down, put back on it the dust cover, the sunshade, and put that back how it's supposed to be. Yeah, this is an internal, this is a unit that's made by Night Force that's actually supposed to mount to your rail. I've made this extra little thread piece on the back there to be able to screw it onto the front of the scope. It's really designed, where I've got this little bubble level, it's designed to clamp down to a rail in front of your scope. I've made this extra little piece, which is what I'm going to be testing, which is made to screw on the front of a 56mm Night Force. So when you've got those sort of setups where there isn't a rail in front of your scope, you can mount it on the front there. Worked really well, I was really happy with it. You'll see it this season. We'll use this for the halfway shots. We use the Charlie Tarak, the big system, for the ultra long range shots. I'm using this for some of these shots to test it and see how it goes. So a really good idea. I think it'll be a really good mid-range package for people who just want to go to that sort of distance. And then we also have, you'll see on most of these scopes, this is the air attack system, which is an adjustable base for the other way going there. I won't get too complicated about that. That's about internal elevation, and that's about shooting extreme long range. What I really wanted to talk about today, rather than messing it up with all that sort of stuff there, was first focal plane, second focal plane, and the amount of power that you actually need to shoot. Now, the world's gone really heavily down first focal plane. There's some good things to go with first focal plane, but there's, as always, there's the other side of the coin as well. Now, in the early days, I explained fairly thoroughly how I like second focal plane. And the main reason I chose it to start off with was with the average style of a reticle, the design of a reticle, when I wanted to go to a lot of holdover, Kentucky windage, whatever you want to call it. When I wanted to go past the amount of internal elevation I had, I wanted to do more than that. I wanted to be able to hold over. With a second focal plane, I could wind the power back, come back right down to 6 power even, and then go to the bottom of the reticle. For those who don't know, in second focal plane, when you adjust your power, your field of view gets larger, so your image gets smaller and you get more in your field of view. but your reticle stays the same. Now, in most first focal plane, especially back then, earlier first focal plane scopes, they would have the 3 big striations, and then the actual proper striation, the proper reticle was in the center there. So when it was zoomed right in, you had your reticle you could see, you could work it all out. When you zoomed right out and took your power back down, in a first focal plane, the reticle shrinks as well, so it stays attached to your image essentially, so it's shrinking. And you lost all your marking down, which you wanted to use for the holdover, so they didn't work so well. Now, what first focal plane reticles have done, they've changed that. From the Horace reticles to just some of the normal MOA or the normal mil dot style reticles, they changed them to where they have that bottom leg on your reticle has marks all the way down. So when you zoom right out, you can still use it right down there, sort of. So that really gets around that problem. That means the first focal plane still works fine. I still, but prefer the second focal plane for ELR. Now, there's ways around it. The main reason I prefer that is because if you do want to zoom right back, you'll find that your reticle gets too small to see, especially in these extreme variable scopes. So when you've got the 8 by scopes, you've got 8 by power. So in a first focal plane, if you've got 8 by power, that seems wonderful until you realize that your reticle is going to be about the right thickness at one of those powers. So not one of those powers, it's somewhere that's going to be the right thickness. At some place, it's almost certain to be too thick, and another place it's going to be too thin, because it's changing in size as you zoom in and zoom out. Things like, for ELR, in most cases, if you've got your elevation, you've got everything else, you want to come in on your power to a certain degree. But let's say we're going with the philosophy of we're going to go right in. If you've got 35 power or 30 power or 40 power or 50 power, you're going to zoom right in because it's a long way away. Well, what happens is your reticle becomes very thick, and then it becomes hard to see around your reticle because it's in your road. Equally, if you haven't got enough elevation and you want to zoom right out, so you want to come right back down to your 5 power or 7 power or 6 power or 4 power or whatever it is, you'll find your reticle becomes very small, but very hard to read because it's so small. So that's still a win for the second focal plane because it doesn't change. It doesn't change in its size. You get a reticle like the MOART, which is thin, in the likes of the Night Force second focal plane scopes, and it stays at the right thickness no matter what your power is. So that works very well on that score. Now, for people who want to PRS shoot or want to use military calls or that sort of stuff, and they want to be able to go to their 1.5 mil holdover to the side or make adjustments by that or make measurements by that with that fixed reticle, yes, there's definitely a win. So a bit more in the competition side of things. Some people like to shoot that way. So the the first focal plane has a win in those places. But generally, if you're doing things where your vision is more important, you want to be able to hold, whether that is through zooming back and holding way down the bottom of your reticle and you want to be able to see your reticle, or zooming right in. In saying that, this is first focal plane, this is the Gen 2, like I said, this is the Valdata scope, and what they've done is produced a very, very, very fine reticle. Means in the low powers, it's harder to see for sure, but this was designed for ELR. So when you're up there, once you go above 15 into the 20, 25 and 30, that reticle stays very fine and is really good for using up there. So that's the way they've answered it, with specifically designing something for extreme long range. Last bit on the second focal plane, first focal plane, is the moment you talk hunting, then in my opinion, first focal plane does not fit that equation. Now, no doubt there's people that, and there's ways around that and all sorts of stuff with illuminated reticles and all the rest of it. What I'm actually talking about is hunting. Generally, you're talking, in most situations, you're talking low light. In low light, to make your scope work better, you're coming back in power. So you're actually coming back both for field of view so you can see more, but also letting more light in. So when you do that, then all of a sudden a thin a reticle that's become small becomes a real detraction, a real negative in that situation. Now, illumination can answer that to a degree, but what answers it best, in my opinion, without question, is second focal plane. Reticle stays the same side, field of view, everything steps up. So in my mind, the second focal plane, and I suppose a little bit of history, from what I understand, first focal plane is where scopes started. And second focal plane came in after that. Second focal plane became very popular. And then as now we've moved back into this PRS world where there's more and more people wanting to competition shoot on set size, target ranges, that sort of stuff, and they want to be able to use these holes to do things so they can actually shoot at different distances using holes that are recorded or are being called, then first focal plane came back into it. So everybody's jumped on that bandwagon to go first focal plane. Yes, it has some wins, but if you actually want an all-round scope, I would still go with second focal plane. I would still recommend that. All up to the individual, really much how you shoot things, but still for me a win, and still my favourite is second focal plane without question. But like I said, first focal plane can do things very thoroughly in the right places. Okay, last bit I wanted to go through, and really a little bit of the reason for this video, is the amount of power you need and how to use that power. In truth, the early shots I did at extreme long ranges before I'd figured out adjustable bases, and like I said, I was using second focal plane. Actually, this scope here, I've got 3 of these. One of those scopes there, I've forgotten exactly which one it was, but my first one, essentially sitting on top of my 3-through Lapua, and was shooting out at 3,000 meters. And to get that done in just a scope that had been set up on a 60mm cant, so 60 MOA cant, so I got out of that scope, I got 124 minutes of elevation, and I was trying to do shots at 180 minutes of elevation, or 200 minutes, I forgot now how far it was. To do that, I was coming right back in power, so I was using 6 power to shoot at the target. Found it still very accurate and very usable. Didn't need, as you don't need, and it depends what you're doing, but this is not bird photography. I'm obviously using a spotter, but largely could see my hits as well. But that is, your eyes are a very, very powerful thing, and using even 6 power can see actually quite clearly out to 2 miles if your air is clear enough and things are clear enough. And when you're actually holding on target, as long as you can see your target properly, even though it's only a pinhead size, and even though it's only probably 2 or maybe 3 times as thick as your reticle, or as big as your reticle is thick, so it's still very small, you can still put your crosshairs or your holdover position, you can still section it onto target. And that means your target is big enough that you can actually section the crosshairs or the point in the reticle across it, where you can see that accurate and hold that still. That's as good as you need. It really is. You don't need any more. Now, is it nicer to shoot with more power? Listen, yes, it can be. Is it nicer to have a bigger flasher scope? Yes, for sure. More power is not always your friend, but the smaller your target is and the better you can see it, to a degree, yes, it helps. But once you can see it properly, once you can see it clear enough, and I'll come back to that in a minute, and you can put your reticle on it straight and your parallax is set properly, we are shooters. What we're trying to do is hit the target. We're not trying to see the target with fine details. We want to be able to see it enough so we can get the target on. So power, actually, like I said, that was 6 power back then. My honest call is largely 15 power is what I use. As I've got more power scopes and that sort of stuff, I start to come up into the 20s and 25s, but going to full power is very rare. I would say I'm coming up, I was using comfortably 25 power at just under 3 miles. So the 5,000 yard shots that I was doing. When I put on a 7x35 scope, I came up into the 30 power. I never found myself at 35, but I came up to the 30 power, but didn't make any difference. And to be honest, some days I'd get on and set everything up and I'd have the scope at 15 power or at 20 power, and I'm focusing on everything else and I didn't push any harder. So yes, it was nice to use that bit of extra power, but did it make any difference? Not really. The only place I've found extra power works is when I'm trying to shoot a Coke can at 2Ks or that sort of stuff. Then just being able to see the Coke can and having enough power to be able to see that ridiculously small target out at such a long way, yes, then extra power can help. So keep in mind, and there's 2 things I wanted to go into that part of it. One was, more power doesn't let you see further to a degree. The air quality is what always will limit you. no matter if you're looking out into the stars where you've only got a thin section of air to look through, and it's actually the low air that tends to be dirty, the high air tends to be cleaner. So when you're looking straight out through our atmosphere, looking at the stars, you can, with more power, see further and further and further and further, because you have very little dirt you're actually looking through. When you're looking sideways through our atmosphere or through our ground air, that's actually very dirty. From humidity to dust to smoke to particulates of various natures, it's very, very heavy. Last year we didn't get to even attempt our 5K shot because we had smoke on the other side of the country, 5,000 kilometres away. There were big fires there early in the season, late in the season there were fires here, but none of them within 500 miles of where we are, but still that smoke that was in the air affected our shooting to a degree. There's also humidity in that side of things, and what we really need to see that far is clean air. Then we get into mirage and times a day and all the bits and pieces, but clean air is the issue. Amount of power isn't the issue, and how clean and sharp the glass is isn't the issue. The issue is the air. So I suppose that's the last bit I want to get onto, and like I said, what I started the video for in a real sense is I noticed someone talking on YouTube the other day about how to set power to shoot extreme long range, or shoot long range, I think I was saying, and to use high power. Every different distance you need to adjust your diopter all the time. Now diopter, for those that don't know, is your actual focus of the from your viewing optics to actually see everything as clear as possible. Adjusting that and adjusting your parallax. Now your parallax, which is on the side here, which is what a lot of people refer to as the focus knob, is not really it. I've got a video on that, and I'll put a link on there on how to set your parallax, but essentially you focus the scope to your eye through the diopter adjustment. On these you've got a lock nut and you adjust that. On other ones like this one here will have just a fast focus adjustment system on it, but you set the scope to your eye, and then you adjust the side here, and largely focus does the job. You focus it to the range you want, but really you check your parallax by moving your head up and down and making your eyeball around a little bit behind the lens there, so you can see that the reticle stays attached to the target. It doesn't move around when your eye moves around. Your eye moves around, it should stay attached. If it moves around, your focus isn't set perfectly. Now what he's actually describing was that to get both those things work, so you get the crystal clear vision and the parallax perfect, is that they're actually adjusting things a tiny bit in the diopter as well to get it on there. My comment is, listen, if really the image is the most important thing to you, then yes, that can happen. Some scopes are like that. Most scopes, you'll get a little bit of that, adjusting it all the time. But to be truthful, are you taking a picture of it with that scope, or are you trying to hit the target? If you're trying to hit the target, don't fuss with that fine level of detail. You're going to spend more time messing with your scope than you are getting the job done. And that's even in a target form. Now, obviously, if you're going to be at that range shooting that for all day and that matters to you, makes it a little bit easier on your eye and all that sort of stuff, then okay, you're going to mess with it. My honest call is don't mess with it. My honest call is, I should say, let's not me go preaching as to how you should do it. What I do is I set my parallax, I set my diopter, make sure it's good, and then I come on to where I make it clear, and then I check my parallax and I move it. And yes, sometimes I'll find that it's slightly clearer in one place than where the parallax is right. To be honest, I don't care. I get the parallax right. Your eye tends to do the rest of the job in the way of getting that fine details, but it's not bird photography. I'm not taking a picture of the thing. I admittedly am using a spotter, but in saying that, I still see all the stuff I want to see there. But I'm trying to hit the target. So as long as I can put my crosshairs, whether it's sectioning it or in these big power scopes where I can put the dot on the center of the target, that's all I'm concerned about. That the parallax is right, so that dot is where I want that dot to be. What I mean there is if your parallax isn't right, your head in a slightly different position means that the reticle isn't exactly where you think it is. Get your parallax right, and then it is where it is. Actually, regardless of how well it's focused. As long as you've checked your parallax, then it's doing the right job. And what I'm trying to do is hit that target. That's my job. And that's whether that's in a hunting thing, in a service thing, in a target thing, or whatever it is, what I'm trying to do is hit that target and trying to keep it consistent on that target. So parallax is extremely important. Enough vision to see, and to see clear enough is what I'm after. Actual perfect clarity isn't my concern. In saying that, I use some really high quality gear, and yes, they are very clear, but like I said, the level, the fine details there, it's really more about practicality, I suppose. And these are, again, like I said, these little Cytrons did an awesome job. There's now a whole range of very well built Japanese scopes built for all sorts of brands, that with Japanese glass, which is all doing a really, really good job, really lifting up the game. So lots and lots of choices out there. I would still come back to, obviously, your construction and all that sort of stuff is very important. Your accuracy to be able to dial on accurately, so the dials, how they work very accurately. Amount of internal elevation is my key ingredient for ELR shooting without any question, and I would still tend to go, as much as there's some very good first focal plane scopes out there and they do the job for the ELR stuff really well as well, I would tend to prefer second focal plane, but it's really close on the ELR side of things. But if you're after an all-round scope, so you want to be able to do that, but you also want to use it for hunting and that side of things, then I would put second focal plane in front. Anyway, that's enough of my yibba yabba for today. Hope that's value to someone. Thanks for checking in, guys. And listen, keep in mind, we do this all out of our budget. So if you can help us in any way you can, we now have club membership for people who can be part of our team. That also lets you ask some other questions. So any support we can get would really be appreciated. But like, share, subscribe, and thanks for checking in on us, guys. We'll catch you next time.